Hey, it's Brennan, and today I bring you a film that, in my opinion, is one of the most important within film history as a whole. This film has been well known for being one of the first sci-fi horror films, and for being one of the most effective with a female lead. And this movie is the well-loved 1979's Alien. This video will of course work just like all my other ones, where first I will give you a breakdown of the story, and then I will give you my analysis. Of course, as usual, there is a heavy spoiler warning because I will be going into detail about the whole story. And that's pretty much it. So without further ado, let's get started. I will be analysing specifically the director's cut version of the Alien movie, so if you've seen a different version of the Alien movie, you may get a little bit confused with some of the parts I bring up. We start the movie off by panning across the black emptiness of space, with only stars and this planet very close in our field of view, as some text comes up onto screen, and it slowly forms the word Alien. It's a simple title sequence compared to the rest of the movie. Then we cut to the outside of the Nostromo. We get some text giving us a bit of brief information about the spaceship, before we then start seeing the interiors. The vast empty corridors with no one inside. As we continue to explore the ship though, we come to a room full of sleep pods. And in these pods is our main crew for the Alien story. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I will introduce you to all of the characters now, but in the movie we do learn their names in a different order. Firstly, there's the captain, Dallas.
Standard procedure is to do what the hell they tell you to do.
Then there's the medical and science research officer, Ash.
Maybe I've jeopardized the rest of us, but it was a risk I was willing to take.
Then we have two other members of the crew, Kane and Lambert. Then we have Parker and Brett, who are two workers on the Nostromo. And last, but certainly not least, we have Ripley, who is our lead character and the second highest in command on the Nostromo. Kane is the first to wake from the sleep pods. Directly after this, we cut to a scene of the crew eating a meal together. The crew are mostly joking with each other and very friendly. However, Parker brings up a bit of a dispute that him and Brett have about the pay situation. However, Dallas and the rest of the crew shut it down. Dallas then decides to go and speak with the ship's intelligence system, known as Mother. Mother informs him that they've received some sort of odd signal, possibly a distress beacon. Because of this, Mother has redirected the Nostromo's path to the planetoid where the signal is coming from. With this, Dallas informs the rest of the crew that they will be landing on the nearby planetoid. The rest of the crew aren't so happy about this, but Ash informs them that if they don't, they do risk having all their pay docked. The crew try to communicate with whoever is sending out this signal, but there's no response. They assess the planet from afar and find that actually humans can walk on it, and it's a relatively small planetoid. The crew then separate a shuttle from the Nostromo, which they then use to land on the planetoid. It's a rough landing, but they make it relatively fine, with very little damage. The crew have managed to land within walking distance of the signal. And so Dallas decides that himself, Lambert, and Kane will go and check it out, while Ripley stays on the ship as now the head of command. Ash then takes up the position of watching them from afar and making sure that they're okay. While on the planet, Dallas, Kane, and Lambert discover that there is actually a massive, very foreign-looking ship. This ship is completely unlike the Nostromo. It's organic in nature, biomechanical, and the inside almost looks like an animal's internals. They reach the center of the ship where the pilot seems to be in the pilot's seat, except he is long deceased and appears to be fused with the pilot's chair. Kane then discovers a hole in the ground, which leads to a massive chamber filled with eggs. Meanwhile, Ripley updates Ash on Mother's decoding of the signal. It's not actually an SOS signal. It seems to be a warning. Ripley wants to go and warn Kane, Dallas, and Lambert, but Ash says it's far too late and they'll be heading back soon anyway. However, Kane makes his way further into the egg room, discovers there's a weird mist that seems to react when it's touched. He falls into one of the pits with the eggs and goes up to one of the eggs, which seems to have a living organism inside it. He goes up to it to prod it and investigate, and it opens up and a facehugger latches onto his face. Dallas and Lambert return to the ship with an incapacitated Kane. Dallas requests Ripley to let him in so that they can get medical attention to Kane. But Ripley knows about the quarantine laws, and she's very concerned about bringing a foreign organism onto the Nostromo. Ash, however, disobeys Ripley and lets them on anyway. Dallas and Ash take Kane to the surgery room, where they cut off his spacesuit and then try and get to work on taking the facehugger off of him. When Ripley arrives, Lambert smacks Ripley because Lambert sees it as a betrayal for Ripley to not want to let them in. But Parker agrees with Ripley. This is a huge risk, and very, very dangerous to the well-being of the crew. After scanning Kane's body, Dallas then decides it's best to actually try and remove the facehugger from Kane's face. Dallas manages to use one of the tools to cut into the facehugger's leg, but it shoots out acid blood. The crew then head down 2 layers, where the acid blood of the facehugger has completely ripped straight through the metal layers of the Nostromo. After seeing how dangerous this facehugger can be, they then decide to leave him and simply observe him. Ash, however, seems to be particularly interested in this facehugger. He stays in the medical room for very long periods of time, studying this facehugger and how it works. Ripley confronts him because she feels that it's odd that the science and medical research officer would break the quarantine protocols so willingly. The crew continue on with repairing the shuttle and preparing to make their way back to the main body of the Nostromo. However, while this happens, Ash then informs Dallas, who then informs Ripley, that the facehugger has left Kane's body. Kane is now seemingly fine, and they have a bit of trouble finding the facehugger at first, but then it shows up dead. Ripley feels that the facehugger has already caused too much trouble and is far too dangerous to take with them, but Ash wants to keep it for further study. Dallas, very strangely, agrees with Ash. Ripley is frustrated at Dallas for his decision to let Ash keep the facehugger, but Dallas explains that he is just obeying company orders. Now, having finished the necessary repairs, they then take the shuttle back up to the main body of the Nostromo. The crew are very grateful for the success of returning back to the main body of the Nostromo, and they prepare for the long journey back to Earth. However, Kane has suddenly awoken. He seems to be fine, although very dehydrated and needing some food before the long journey back. And with this, they decide to have one last meal before the journey back. And now we come to the infamous meal scene. Everything seems fine until all of a sudden Kane starts sputtering, and then he's writhing in pain on the table. And suddenly he is chest bursted by a small alien figure. This little lizard-like creature then bursts its way out of his body, runs across the table, and disappears into the ship. The crew are traumatized by this. but they move on and wrap up Kane's body to then eject it, keeping them as safe as possible from any further surprises. And now that they've ejected Kane's body, it's time for the search to begin for the alien that is now roaming the Nostromo. Brett shows off a special modified cattle prod, while Ash shows off a special tracker that tracks changes in air density. They set off with these tools and a net to then try and capture this small alien. Ripley, Parker and Brett are searching for the alien and they come across Jones, the ship's cat. Brett lets the cat go, so Parker and Ripley send him after it so that they don't get distracted by it while they're trying to find the alien. Brett finds Jones, but then he also finds a very large piece of skin from the alien. The alien has already begun shedding its skin and growing in size, and it waits for Brett until he gets closer, where it then drops down, picks him up, kills him, and takes him away. Ripley and Parker see Brett get taken away by the alien, and they come back to the rest of the crew to then decide what to do next. The crew, now having lost 2 members, decide that things are getting very dangerous, and they need to treat this thing with extreme caution. The crew decide on a plan, where they will trap it into a small space by closing all the doors and the vents, and then find a way to kill it. They rig up some flamethrowers, and Dallas heads into the vent to try and find the alien. The crew can see that the alien is in the vents with Dallas, and their plan has worked. Until it gets far too close to Dallas, and he can't see it coming, until it's already too late. The remaining members of the crew find the flamethrower and tracker that Dallas was using, but the alien has already taken Dallas, and there's no other trace of him. Lambert is extremely emotionally distraught. She says that they should just take the shuttle and leave, but the shuttle only fits 3, and there's 4 of them. The 4 remaining members, of course, being Lambert, Ripley, Parker, and Ash. Whilst Lambert is emotionally spiraling, Ripley then decides to take control of the situation. They end up settling on a plan where they will eject the xenomorph out into space, since it seems very impossible to kill it by any other means. Ripley then decides to go to Mother to try and get some answers. Why were they sent to this warning beacon? And what is the ship's protocol? Ripley finds that there is an executive order for the science officer only, and that is 937. Now, what is 937? Well, Ash isn't telling Ripley. She grows frustrated with him, but she's determined to find out what's going on. Ash, however, stops her from leaving. He starts shutting doors as she's trying to escape, and then he starts attacking her, eventually trying to ram a magazine down her throat. But Parker and Lambert show up just in time to stop Ripley from being suffocated. Ash appears to have superhuman strength, going completely wild and nearly killing all 3 of them, but Parker manages to take off Ash's head. And that's because he's actually a robot. Yes, one of the synthetics. None of the crew knew that Ash was a robot. So Ripley solders the connection back together, and they speak to Ash's now semi-decapitated head. Ash then explains what his intentions were. Executive Order 937 is from the company. The Executive Order 937 is that Ash must capture, contain, and bring back for research the alien life form, and all other priorities are rescinded, the crew's lives being part of that. In this debilitated state, Ash still tries to mock them, but Parker, as they are leaving, then uses a flamethrower to torch his head, and we see the synthetic underneath. Now, with the only 3 remaining members of the crew, Ripley then decides with Lambert and Parker that they are going to use the shuttle to escape, and completely blow up the rest of the Nostromo. Ripley then heads off to get Jones and set off the detonation, while Parker and Lambert go to get coolant for the shuttle. While Parker and Lambert are trying to get the coolant, however, the xenomorph hears the noise that they are making, and it finds them and kills both of them. Now Ripley is on her own, so she starts the countdown for the detonation and makes her way to the escape shuttle. However, along the way, she discovers the nest that the xenomorph is making, and within the nest is Dallas, still living. Dallas, however, is barely alive, and still muttering, "Kill me." Ripley takes mercy on him and Brett, and flamethrowers the whole nest. This, of course, is wasting a lot of time, so she hurries and tries to get her and Jones to the escape shuttle. But the xenomorph is in her way, so she makes her way back and tries to stop the detonation, but it's far too late, and Mother refuses to stop the detonation. Ripley is frustrated, but she makes good use of her time. She heads over to the shuttle as quickly as possible, and manages to recover Jones along the way. She makes it to the escape shuttle with barely enough time to escape as the Nostromo is exploding. She made it out successfully, and the bliss is apparent, but short-lived, because now she needs to prepare for the journey back to Earth. And as she's preparing for the journey back to Earth, suddenly the xenomorph appears. The xenomorph is sleeping in the shuttle. Ripley didn't notice it coming on because it blends in so well with the mechanics of the ship. Ripley is in a panic, but she comes up with a plan. She makes her way into one of the spacesuits and goes back out into the area where the alien is. She's already put the cat, Jones, into one of the sleep pods, and so she blasts steam to get the alien drawn out, and then she ejects it. The alien is sucked out of the doorway. It tries to grip on, but she shoots it with a harpoon gun. This harpoon gun keeps it tethered to the ship, but she finishes it off by blasting one of the engine thrusters, sending it flying out into the void of space. Now Ripley makes her final sign-off, as she prepares for the long journey back to Earth. Hopefully she'll be picked up by the network within a few days. Now that I've given you a breakdown of the story, let's get into the analysis. Whenever I watch a movie, I always try and see where the inspiration is coming from, and in this case, I think there's a bit of a link between Alien and Star Wars, and also some other horror movies from the time. From the very beginning, we get this dark, eerie, but also mystical space atmosphere being set up. First, we pan across and see this massive planet. It makes us, as the viewer, feel small in comparison to the size of space. We also get this eerie soundtrack that, in my opinion, has some slight elements of the Star Wars soundtrack within it. Then we further reinforce that slightly Star Wars-like feel when we then see the Nostromo from these very particular camera angles. It feels pretty reminiscent of some of the early Star Wars movies, in particular at the beginning of A New Hope, when we see the spaceship that Princess Leia is on, that outside camera angle viewing the ship as it goes by. And then some of the interiors of the Nostromo are actually kind of reminiscent of some Star Wars interiors. However, something that I think Ridley Scott does very well is to establish that this is very different from Star Wars. This is a lot closer to home, and a lot more relatable to us. You see, what I think Ridley Scott does very well is to establish that Alien takes place in our universe, and potentially in the not-too-distant future. On the Nostromo, we see little knickknacks here and there, the mugs that the crew use, the pendulum duck thing that's all throughout the ship. Even the computers that they use on the Nostromo weren't too far removed in terms of technology for the 1970s. Another overarching theme I want to discuss is the way that they hint at Ash being a robot. Obviously, on a first watch through, you'll see his behaviours and think he's a little bit weird. But on a second watch through, those behaviours become a lot more apparent and stand out far more. And so with that being said, let's get into the scene analysis. The first scene with the crew is this scene in the pod room. The scene is very white and very slow, calm. The music isn't very intense, it's very soothing. And when Kane wakes up, he's very slow and deliberate in his movements. This puts us into a relatively calm mood, and certainly sets us up for a very different feeling later on in the movie. However, if you also look, Ash, by comparison to the others, is sleeping with his arms by his sides, whereas the others are all sleeping in much more comfortable positions. Just a little detail that in my opinion goes a long way to building up Ash's robot reveal. Here, while the crew is having their meal, we get to see a little bit more of their personalities. The relationship that Parker and Brett have, and how they interact with Ripley, Lambert, Kane, Dallas, Ash. In particular, from this scene, we can sort of see how rigid Ash is, how playful but also lazy that Parker and Brett are. There's also a lot of moments later on where, in my opinion, it becomes pretty apparent that in terms of skill, Ripley is much better than the others, and that's why she's second in command to Dallas, because Dallas is the only one with more experience and knowledge than her. The mother process I find quite interesting. It's sort of this weird early thoughts of artificial intelligence, but obviously long before artificial intelligence was properly developed. It's quite interesting to see such an early interpretation of what now most people have on their phones. One of the things I like about the intro to Alien is also that they don't really distinguish a main character, at least this early on. Here they show that the crew is a crew, and they work together to get their jobs done. And even though they may not like what they have to do, they're still going to work together to get it done. Then we come to the shot where they're flying to the planetoid. This section, in my opinion, really helps build up some of that tension and really show just how far out and how lonely they are. The exterior shots of the Nostromo simply floating in space. The muffled comms from outside the ship, showing that their signal isn't reaching anyone. And of course, the lack of soundtrack gluing all of that together. As we continue and the crew then decide to actually land on the planet, we get this really cool exterior shot, where once again we're showing how insanely small the Nostromo is by comparison to the planetoid. They describe the planetoid as being small, but of course, when you see the Nostromo by comparison to the massive planetoid, it becomes apparent how small we are as humans in comparison to the universe, and just how isolated and lonely the crew really is, far away from any kind of help. Now, as the crew are landing the smaller shuttle from the Nostromo, the score gets very loud, ominous, and all the sound in the movie also gets very loud. Then when they finally land the shuttle, we hear that very distinct alarm sound that really gets your heart pumping. Now, this scene sets up something that, in my opinion, makes this movie very effective, and much more effective than other movies of its type. Namely, Event Horizon. Something that I think Alien does better than a lot of other horror movies is establish the stakes. The stakes are very high, and even just something as simple as going down onto a planet is extremely dangerous. Space travel is not simple, and they really emphasize that. However, emphasizing this isn't just to say that space travel is dangerous, it also establishes that everything has stakes in this movie. Because of the way they landed the ship, it affects how quickly they can then get off the planetoid and back to the main body of the Nostromo. Every single little thing and every decision they make actually has consequences. And because of these characters all being flawed human characters, they're not perfect, and there's no way that they're going to catch a break. Despite all the panic ensuing, though, once again, Ash shows his robot nature by being far too calm for the situation. Now, in the next scene, we get Brett and Parker talking about repairs with the rest of the crew, and we get this comedic little remark: 17 hours? 25 hours. It's a good little bit of comic relief to lighten the mood before we get into the really dark stuff. Then, when Ripley comes down to actually speak to Brett and Parker, we then get a little bit more of that comedic back and forth between Ripley and Parker. This, to me, isn't just to lighten the mood before the dark stuff, though. This also builds a bit more on Ripley's character. We've already seen that Parker and Brett are rebellious to the rest of the crew, don't really like to follow protocols, and want to get more pay. However, Ripley's character, this is the first time we've really seen her joke around with the crew like this. Ripley understands that Parker and Brett don't want to work, so rather than forcing them to work, she knows that she can just pick up the slack. She is a hard-working person, intelligent, and she also knows how to have a laugh. However, once again, her character, just like all the others, isn't perfect. Then we come to the next scene, where once again, these characters aren't catching a break. They have to go through the loud storm on the planetoid all the way over to the alien ship. And then we also get this weird little bit of Ash doing the weird robot run thing. Now, I mentioned the very loud storm on the planetoid, and they contrast that very well with the quiet ship, where Ripley and Jones are simply lazing around. This really shows how much danger Lambert, Kane, and Dallas are in heading out to the Xenomorph ship. Now, something interesting about the sound design that I noticed when they actually got close to the ship is it suddenly gets very quiet. Now, this does let you hear the dialogue more easily, but it also does something else. To me, it symbolizes the eye of the storm, especially with the, circular, horseshoe-looking shape of the ship. This gives us a false sense of security. You see, we're not surrounded by the loud storm anymore when we're with Dallas, Kane, and Lambert. But just because it's quiet doesn't mean it's safe. In fact, these three are anything but safe heading into the Xenomorph ship. Now, speaking about the ship, this is arguably the most iconic thing about the movie, other than Ripley and the Xenomorph itself. The ship is just so massive, and the design of it, the biomechanical design by H.R. Geiger, is truly phenomenal. The way the inside of the ship almost looks like the spine and ribs of an animal, and then in the pilot's chair, we see that he's fused with the chair. Everything about this ship is so heavily contrasted with the Nostromo, which is human, man-made in design. This ship, however, almost looks like it's alive, or once was. Everything in the ship flows, and has unique curvature that the Nostromo couldn't possibly replicate. And the design of this ship almost mirrors the Xenomorphs themselves, uniquely perfect in its design, but its design is only for one thing: to lead to more death, destruction, and the proliferation of the Xenomorphs. As Dallas, Kane, and Lambert discuss the ship, they also mention that it looks like something has burst out of the pilot's chest. Now, I haven't seen all the Alien movies, so I don't know what the lore reason is behind the pilot or the ship, But when I first watched this movie, it did intrigue me and make me question, why are things the way they are here? The egg room of the ship is another very iconic part to the movie. It's so iconic that Streets of Rage just copied it. This is another room that leaves me with a lot of questions. I have some theories as to what it could be, but without watching the other Alien movies, this room is very mysterious and leaves a lot of questions for the viewer. Now, just quickly, I want to say there are a couple of moments in this movie that, in my opinion, are a little unintentionally funny, and one of them is here. How on earth does Kane fall down into the pit with the eggs? I don't understand it. It's so funny, though, when he just tumbles over like that. In general, this movie is really good at building tension, and this scene with the egg and the facehugger jump scare is no exception. I also really love the way that they frame the eggs and the ship in general. We're both mystified by it as an alien discovery, but also terrified by it because we don't know what's in store. You see, the real greatest fear of every human being on Earth is the fear of the unknown. Because if you don't know what something is, you can't even know what to expect from it. Even if it is something deadly, and you know it's deadly, then at least you can react accordingly to it. But if you don't even know what its purpose or motives are, like in the case of the xenomorphs and the facehuggers, that makes things far scarier. Now, speaking of fear, we come to what, in my opinion, seems to separate Ripley from most of the other members of the crew. Dallas and Lambert are very distraught and scared of what will happen to Kane, and that's why they want to bring him onto the ship. However, Ripley's fear is very different. She is very cautious and wants to protect the other members of the crew. We've already seen earlier that Ripley is not just a stickler for the rules. She doesn't force Parker and Brett to work. However, we also see that she's very smart and very capable, and that's why she wants to keep the rest of the crew safe by quarantining Kane. And once again, in this scene, we get a weird little moment where Ash seems oddly detached. He's not really responding to the other members of the crew, he seems to be thinking internally about what he should be doing next. Or thinking as well as an android can. The camera angles of this surgery scene are also fantastic. The extreme close-ups on the great practical effects make it so much more visceral and so much gorier, scarier, creepier. Once again in this scene, Ash's reasoning seems very self-centered. He doesn't really care about saving Kane, whereas Dallas is working on saving his crew. And that's Dallas's intention the whole time. I'll get more into that later on. Now, in the next scene where we see Dallas just chilling, listening to classical music, this is our first and only bit of diegetic music in the film. Considering we don't hear any other diegetic music within the film, I think it's pretty intentional. It's to show that Dallas is very stressed out, and he's trying to calm himself down. Unfortunately, there's only so much classical music can calm you down in a situation like this. And in the next scene, once again, we get these great examples of how the movie builds tension to lead up to these jump scares. And because some of these jump scares have extremely high stakes, killing some of the characters, it makes other jump scares that are fake outs equally as scary. Now, an interesting little detail that in my opinion is some very good acting is that Dallas's first instinct is to protect Ripley. However, Ash's first instinct is not to go over and protect them, or even to contain it. His reaction contrasts very greatly and shows just how odd Ash's reaction to the facehugger being dead is. Once again, another little detail about this scene is that it establishes further Ripley's personality. She is scared by the facehugger, she's still human, But after the initial scare, she's very forward-thinking, as she is throughout the whole movie, and wants to get rid of it. She wants to keep the rest of the ship safe. When they take off from the planetoid, once again, the stakes are high. We saw how difficult it was for them to land, and it's equally as difficult to get off the planetoid and return back to the main body of the Nostromo. Then they manage to successfully do that, and they leave. But then we get the blow of hearing that they are 10 months from Earth. Once again, a fantastic job by Ridley Scott of establishing just how high the stakes are for space travel. Now, the process of Kane coming back feels slightly reminiscent of the human death process. When humans reach old age, there tends to be a certain process that humans go through. First, they become very ill as their body starts shutting down. But then there is a small grace period of about a day or two where they are back, fully seemingly in their spirits despite their old age, and then after that they pass. It's not a 100% all the time thing, but it does happen, and in my opinion, Kane's process that he goes through is fairly similar to that process. Now, in this next scene, the chest burst scene, once again, Ash's reaction is very off. At first, he doesn't even rush over to help, he's observing the process. And then there's the actual chest burst. Now, the chest burst is an incredible practical effect, and for the time is something that's so above and beyond most other movies. At this point, really only people like Tom Savini were taking the practical effects to this level. However, I will say, when the alien runs across the table, this is one of those unintentionally funny moments for me. Something about the screech noise it makes as it shoots across the table is so funny. Once again, Ash's reaction is very odd. At first, he simply just observes the process that Kane's body is going through. And then, when Kane actually gets chest bursted, then he doesn't want them to touch it, because he wants to see it grow and live on. Now, during the search, we actually see quite a lot of the Nostromo, and we also don't see a lot of the Nostromo. The Nostromo is massive, and it really comes into perspective when you see the crew going through all these different rooms. Now, in this scene, we see the Xenomorph kill Brett. And here's where I want to get a bit more into the actual psychology behind the Xenomorph. As Ash points out later on in the movie, the Xenomorph is the apex predator. But the thing is that this Xenomorph is remarkably smart. The Xenomorph uses its prey's weakness to its advantage. The Xenomorph tends to stay back and watch the crew as they do things so that it can learn their behaviours and then take them out. He watches from afar and notices that Brett is very inattentive, and so it'll be fairly easy to wait for Brett to get alone and then pounce on him. The Xenomorph also notices that they tend to stay in a group, so of course it waits until they separate to actually take them out, rather than trying to take them on all at once. When Dallas goes into the vents, the Xenomorph notices that when it's moving, Dallas starts reacting. We know that the motion trackers that the crew use measure changes in air density, so if the Xenomorph stays completely still, then it won't change the air density. Once again, this Xenomorph is the apex predator. It can stay completely still, blend in with its surroundings as best it can, and it watches and waits for its prey to become vulnerable. It notices that Dallas can't see very well in the dark, so it sneaks up on him in the dark when he's turned the other way, and then when he turns back round, it's far too late. Later on, with Lambert and Kane, the only reason it attacks both of them together is because it's already established at this point that it can take on the humans with no problem. They don't really pose much of a threat. And it navigates heavily by sound. So, when it sees that there's two humans making a lot of noise where Ripley isn't, it makes its way over and takes out two more humans. Then we see later on, Ripley is cowering away from the xenomorph. It navigates by sound, but of course with the loud alarms, it can't hear her. And then again, with the finale of the movie, the xenomorph shows its intelligence. It knows that the safest place is the part where it's not going to detonate, where there aren't bits of the ship breaking. The shuttle. The xenomorph is incredibly intelligent. However, Ripley is also smart, and uses the alien's one weakness against it. Even the alien has to sleep. Now, returning to the scene with Brett, we've got some really good cinematography zooming in on Brett's face. It obscures the environment, but also allows us to see the facial details, and in particular shows him looking up, which also tells us to pay attention upwards. And now returning to the scene with Dallas, Dallas's psychology here is quite interesting to me. It's very clear that the reason he chooses to go into the vents above anybody else is not because he feels that others are incapable, but because he feels that he needs to prove his worth as a captain. He doesn't want to lose any more members of his crew, and he wants to take charge so that he will be the first to go if something happens. It's also the reason that he always leaves Ripley behind, because he knows that Ripley is the most advanced member of the crew beneath him. Again, with Dallas's scene, very good tension building. The way they've got Dallas cramped into this extremely tight vent, and then his headset falling off. I don't know if the headset falling off was intentional, but in my opinion, it adds to the scene, showing that they are really underprepared and very inexperienced with this type of danger. In the next scene, with Ash, Parker, Ripley, and Lambert, we then get a little bit more insight as to how much better Ripley is than the other crew members. Of course, this is an extremely high-tension, high-pressure environment, and we see that Lambert is breaking down. Parker is becoming extremely agitated. But Ash remains stoic, as always, but we know why that is, whereas Ripley is managing to keep relatively cool-headed. Despite all the tragedy that is surrounding her, she is still always thinking of the next step, trying to preserve the lives of the crew and get them out of there. That's also why Ripley doesn't want to leave behind Ash and just leave in the shuttle. Now, in this next scene, where Ripley confronts Mother and Ash, there is a little bit that confuses me. I don't know how Ripley has a bloody nose here. I didn't see anything in the previous scene that would happen to make that. I can see how Ash might be leaking some of his fluids, because Ripley did throw him against the wall earlier, but we didn't see any kind of injuries that happened to Ripley. So perhaps there was a cutscene or something? This movie isn't perfect by any means, but in my opinion, it's a pretty damn good movie. Now we come to the scene where Ash tries to kill Ripley and Parker and Lambert as well. The effects in this scene are wild, and in particular the actor who plays Ash did a phenomenal job of looking batshit crazy. That insane grope power that he has, though, is kinda freaky. Once again, when Ash gets his head severed, practical effects are just amazing in this movie. This next scene, where they confront Ash's decapitated head, is a little bit janky, of course. The match cut that they try and do obviously there's a massive difference between the fake head and Ash's real head. Of course, there's only so many expectations you could have, especially going into a movie that's from 79. It is really incredible they were even able to get a prosthetic that was that close back then. Now, when it comes to the design of Ash's robot head, I do feel that there's something a little bit symbolic about it. In general, this movie really seeks to emphasize how humans react to danger, to things that are completely opposite to them, and yet how we adapt and survive. When we see Ash's robot head, we really see what he really is: a featureless, mindless drone. All that mocking that he did of them, it's programmed. He's a robot at the end of the day. He's not really human, and so all his directives were given by the company. It contrasts so greatly with the Ash that we saw minutes earlier, and with the remaining human members of the crew. The reason that Ash didn't survive is because, once again, he's not human, and he can't adapt the way that we humans can. And now moving on to the final escape. When Ripley sees that Parker and Lambert have been killed, she panics. Once again, the human side of her character is really coming out. In this extremely high-pressure, high-tension situation, she's panicking just as any human would. But, once again, her clear-headed, forward-thinking nature comes to the forefront, and this is why she, out of all the other crew members, survives. Because even though she may have flaws that make her less superior in other ways to the other crew members, at the end of the day, it's her mind that matters, and ultimately her mind that helps her triumph over the xenomorph. When she finally makes it onto the shuttle, it's a massive breath of fresh air for both the audience and for Ripley. Once again, despite the panic that ensued, she was still able to think clearly to get to the shuttle, and even save Jones along the way. Like I said before, Ripley then uses her intelligence to then take on the xenomorph and actually save herself. Despite the xenomorph's best efforts to blend in, to try and kill her and the other crew members, her intelligence and adaptability ultimately pulled through. In these moments, Ripley is singing to herself, and in my opinion, this is her trying to soothe herself so that she can think clear-headedly in the face of danger. And so, to close off this video, I'll give you my overall thoughts on Alien. If it wasn't obvious already, I love this movie. It is amazing, and I'm so glad that I got to watch it and analyse it for you guys. Of course, it's not a flawless movie. There are still some aspects to it that don't make a whole lot of sense, there's some mistakes here and there, but overall, I am very positive toward this movie. And that's all from me for today. If you liked the video, give it a like, and if you want to see more videos like this from me in future on video games and movies, subscribe, because I will be releasing more videos very soon. Bye bye.